my first question is, how are we supporting your teen?
Mm.
It has to start with the adults in that space, because we can't ask those adults to co-regulate, to normalize, to navigate, to validate if they themselves aren't feeling regulated, because that's where it starts. Everything else hangs from that. Everything.
And welcome to In This Together. It is just me this week. So to let you know, sadly, Liba isn't able to join us. I've already said she is the busiest woman I know. She's into psychology in her third year up in Manchester. So she's not able to join us. So I'm afraid you're just going to have to put up with me. But it isn't just me, because we do have the fantastic Jennifer Wyman, who is the founder and director of Bridge the Gap, Child Mental Health CIC, relationship-focused leader and passionate about using her lived experience to inform her work. Our focus question today is, how can we bridge the gap in emotional literacy for our children? And that is right up Jennifer's street, I would say, isn't it, Jennifer? Nice to see you.
Absolutely. Nice to see you too, Becky. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for giving us your time. I'm really excited to talk with you today. So tell us about Bridge the Gap. Where did it come from? What inspired you to start it?
Yeah, so it's always a long story. So I'm going to try and condense that to a palatable version. But it comes from lived experience, as you said in that introduction, really, as a child, as a parent, but also as a professional. So unfortunately for me, at the age of 8, we experienced a significant family trauma, which, I had lots of amazing people in my life. I was so fortunate. People go through so much worse. But it was significant to me, and it wasn't acknowledged as being as significant as it was. And that led to problems for me with my sense of self, my sense of identity, that really led me into experiences that added more significant trauma on top of that. So it was very layered right up until early adulthood, really. And there was no help, no support. And I remember my mum taking me when I was around 17 to a mental health clinic that I'd been referred to, and it was absolutely hideous. And I walked in and I just turned to her and I said, "Get me out of here now." And I didn't access support then, really, until my late 30s, early 40s. So it was hugely impactful, that first experience of external support. And then as a parent as well, I have 2 children who are now adults, but one of my children really struggled significantly with their mental health as well. And it felt for me like nothing had changed from when I was a child as to now, and I'm trying to get support for my child. So really it was both of those things, but also an added element of that I have a brother who's autistic, and naturally felt very early on in my career working with children, found it very easy to build that rapport with those young people. So I think always been fascinated by emotional well-being and how we can use our relationships to connect with people. And then my background is in early years education. And then in 2014, I was offered the opportunity to specialise in emotional literacy, which I took. And I did a year's worth of training focused on emotional literacy, but also all of the prime areas of learning and development, really. So really enhancing that early years background, but doing that as an adult with all of this experience compared to when I first qualified at 21, it's just so different. And it really did light a fire inside of me that I couldn't extinguish. I found it really hard working within the system after having all of this knowledge. But also it was very healing for me. And I just thought, oh, okay. So this is what this emotion is. And this is why I behaved that way when I was a child. And I understand my reactions. And maybe I can start forgiving myself for some of those. And maybe I can let go of some of the shame of some of the experiences I've had. And I just kept thinking, I wish I'd have had this knowledge then. Why did nobody tell me this then? But also, why did nobody tell me this as a parent? I was told, what my children could and could not eat. I was told how I should feed them, how they should sleep. I was told everything. And the goalposts kept changing with those things. So for me, it was, oh, but this is development. This is not going to shift. This is how we develop. This is how we thrive. I need to navigate this parenting journey with that at the heart of it for the individual child that's in front of me, and not for the child that I thought I was going to get, because we all do that, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
We all
100%.
imagine what it's going to be like as a parent.
Yeah.
So I had an interesting dream 3 nights in a row that made me make the decision to leave my pension, my career, and do something different with this passion. And that was where Bridge the Gap came from. And it started from empowering parents with the information and knowledge that I had as a professional, that I felt every parent should have, but also training schools. So developed teacher training programs that I would go into schools and deliver to really look at the whole culture of the school and how we could embed emotional literacy into that ethos and culture, but not in a way that was going to add extra pressure to already stressed out teachers. And then it evolved. Nikki, my co-director, reached out to me. She's a mental health nurse and therapist, and she was coming at it from a different background, but with the same, this is what my patients needed when they were children. So when Nikki came on board, we started to look at how we can deliver interventions for children one-to-one. What small groups can we offer? How can we make that adaptable, accessible, different to what's already available? And the rest is history, really. We've got a lovely team now in a lovely building. I'm very stressed most of the time because running a charitable organisation, running any small business, is hard. Running a charitable organisation in 2025 is beyond stressful. And then working within the field we do with how many children we're seeing struggling at the moment, it is hard, but the passion's there. We've got so much hope and we enjoy bringing that to other people.
And I know that you see the impact, don't you? You shared a couple of things this week, haven't you, online, of young people that have really benefited and are now giving back, which must be so special for you.
So special, Becky. So we have a youth volunteering programme at Bridge the Gap. Because belonging is so important to us as humans, it's important for us that children who come to Bridge the Gap feel that sense of belonging, but that they can belong as a part of that for as long as they need. So it's not about a quick fix or a short-term solution. And for the young person you're talking about, she's amazing. And she came to us as a child from year 10, really struggling and wanted support, but had struggled to engage with previous services. And we just got to know her and really believed in her. We have no magic wand to wave. It is all about relationship and emotional literacy. But yes, then when she turned 18, she came into our youth volunteering programme, and she's recently started writing incredible poetry about her experiences here, but how important it is to be able to give that back to young people as well. So it becomes a cycle that is just so fantastic. And we're just starting to see that now because we've been around long enough to see that. But I know it will continue.
Yeah, that's powerful, isn't it? That's longevity, that's impact over a long term, not just a 6-week program and then move on. And I think there's some things that really resonated from your kind of experience there. Were, number one, that idea that young people will experience lots of different things, and often it's not the experience, it's what they get after, isn't it? It's about how that experience is framed and how they're supported, and that's often what we miss out on, and not understanding what that young person has gone through and how significant it is for them, whatever it is. And I think also that I've heard so many times with young people that have really struggled on their first experience at accessing support, and that can be for lots of different reasons. It might be that they just didn't connect with the person that they were meeting with, or they've had to jump through lots of hoops to get there, and actually it's 18 months later than they needed it. But those first experiences can be really crucial to whether a young person then, like you said, you didn't go back to get support till your 30s. It can mean a massive difference between the progress someone can make when they know they need support. And it takes a lot, doesn't it, for a young person to say, yes, I will go and meet this strange adult and talk to them. So when it doesn't work, it can be really tough, can't it?
Yeah. And I think you're so right. And that is what we always say is, we haven't got a magic wand, as I've said previously. Every child comes to us with their own experiences, their own challenges, their own strengths, their own skills, their own social dynamics, all of those things, the pressures they're facing. So we might not be the best fit for every child. But what we can do is give every child that comes through our doors a positive experience of what support feels like. So that if we do have to transition that child into alternative support, maybe they need to be in secondary services, maybe they need more specific therapy than what we would deliver. But we can help them with that transition. So we're not just saying, it's very important, we're not saying we can't work with you. It's very important we don't make a young person feel that no one can work with them. And we see this a lot where doors are slammed in by every service, and what is left is that sense of hopelessness for the family and for that child. And yeah, I'm passionate that every child who comes through Bridge the Gap doors has a positive experience. And that's the same with school as well. We want young people to have a good experience in school so that they aren't worried about the next stage that they're going through. But yeah, certainly for us, that's hugely significant in our success, is making sure that we take time to get to know that young person. We don't rush anything. And also just the space itself that we're in, it isn't clinical. It's the absolute opposite of what I was faced with at 17.
Isn't that interesting that you've got a really clear marker of what you don't want to do, which can often be the starting point for brilliant organisations like yours. You've used the analogy of emotional swimming lessons before, which I really love. I think it's such a clever way of thinking about what you do. Can you just expand on what that means in a practical sense?
Yeah, so for me, it's when a child goes into school and we're teaching them maths, we don't put a GCSE exam paper in front of them. We teach them the basics, and then as they grow up, we extend and scaffold that knowledge and learning. We send children to school to learn things, and we send children outside of school for certain things and skills. Of course, they have swimming lessons in school as well, but we teach them that for a very important reason, not because we can't guarantee that they're not going to fall into deep water, that they're not going to need those skills, but in case they do. So for me, emotional literacy is the exact same thing. We're not saying your child is never going to face a challenge if you give them good emotional literacy skills and nurture that social and emotional development. But what we're saying is that you are giving them the tools to be able to emotionally swim through those challenges without fear of those feelings that they're experiencing, without that sense of hopelessness that we mentioned, so important, them knowing that this is going to pass, knowing how to ask for help. Where is my lifeguard? What do they look like? How do I ask for help? How do I raise their attention? So it's all of those things. But yes, for me, emotional swimming lessons are as important as swimming lessons, if not more so, because we're far more likely to face an emotional challenge than we are to fall into deep water. But there is so much stigma around it. There's still so much lack of awareness around proactive and preventative support and learning around this, that I think we've got a long way to go. But that would be my goal, Becky. If in years to come I look back and you see that parents, just like they send them to swimming lessons, say, oh, we better take them to, Bridge the Gap or somewhere like that, I'm sure we will inspire lots of other services across the UK to actually go and learn about emotions and learn how to navigate sadness, learn how to navigate worry, know what to do with frustration and uncertainty. How do we sit with those? But not just stop at that age, but know how to, like with the maths, how do we build on that early learning to really give them quite complex skills and strengths to be able to navigate even more difficult challenges as they get older. If I'd have had that, I'd have been so much safer. If I'd have known what my body was telling me, what these feelings were, I didn't need to be frightened of them, that they were my friends, I could listen to them. Oh, I mean, I wouldn't be here now, I'm sure, but I would have had a different experience growing up for sure.
Yeah, I think it's always really interesting in schools that we're happy to sit down with a young person or a child and explain the maths or explain the English or explain those things. And more often than not, we're patient with them and we understand that they don't come in understanding Shakespeare or algebra or what have you. But when it comes to emotions, we seemingly have such little patience for a child or a young person that struggles with their emotions. We assume that they should just be able to do it. Sometimes because we can do it or because we're not experiencing the same things as them. And it's really interesting. I mean, I'll always say, I think emotional literacy is more important than English and maths. I'm just going to say it, Jennifer.
Yeah. Well,
I know
you
it
won't
be
have
popular,
me disagree with you.
Yeah. But I think if we could get that right, so I think when I was at Senko, so many of the young people who were struggling in lessons, their first barrier was the feelings that they were having about the fact that they were struggling with their learning. And if they could, so the ones that shut down and just wouldn't do anything, or the ones that turned the table over and left, that was really all about them being able to kind of understand their feelings of fear, of frustration, and know how to deal with that. But we don't give them the skills. I mean, I think we are getting better at it.
We are, but emotions drive our behaviour. There's always a why. And children don't really come up to us and say, look, I'm stuck, it's really dark down here, I'm completely overwhelmed. They show us in other ways. And I think a huge barrier to that in the classroom is adult discomfort. We did not have this education ourselves. We were not taught about emotions. So when we see a young person struggling with a difficult emotion like that, it's innate in us to try and fix it. I think a huge part of that is the discomfort that we feel as adults when we see children upset and dysregulated. We have not had this education ourselves. All of the sessions that I do with parents specifically focus around this is I just want my child to be happy.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, happiness is an emotion that comes and goes like any other, joy, glad, pleasant emotions like those don't stay with us 24/7. So let's reframe that, because if that's your goal for your child, you are going to be disappointed and you will never reach it. My goal for my children is not for them to be happy, it's for them to be safe, for them to feel content, for them to know who they can go to for help when they need it, to know coping tools for themselves so they can self-regulate in those moments, but to normalise those emotions. And because as adults we haven't had that education, it makes it really difficult and uncomfortable when we see a child experience them. So our whole body reacts in a way that I just need to make this stop. In terms of the classroom, then you've also got however many other children in the vicinity, all with different feelings, all with different needs. And so you are going to be going into panic mode as well a little bit. Our own brains are going to be, that amygdala might start to flicker a little bit because we're thinking, how do I make this stop? How do I, continue keeping the rest of the classroom safe and calm? So I think adult discomfort is one of the biggest barriers I see to nurturing emotional literacy skills in children.
That's really interesting. And also they feed off our emotions, don't they? So when we are scared, frustrated, etc., then it absolutely impacts how they're feeling. And, we've both been there in front of a class, mine a bit older than yours probably, but when it's not going your way and you're feeling that frustration, it impacts your language use, it impacts the way you interact, and children will pick up on that. And I have, reacted in ways when I reflect on it thinking, well, obviously that's going to make things worse. it's obviously not going to help if I've just shouted at this child or this class. Why would I ever imagine that that's going to calm someone down? Because I know it wouldn't calm me down if someone shouted at me. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right that actually when we're talking about emotional literacy, we need to start with ourselves, don't we? We need the adults to be
Absolutely.
emotionally literate. And again, we can make assumptions that because we're adults that we have those skills, but we don't, because we haven't been taught them and we haven't had that curriculum, which is why it's all the more important to start feeding that in now. And I think it's often seen as a soft skill, isn't it? But it's
Yeah.
crucial.
It is. I mean, EQ has been proven to be a greater indicator of long-term outcomes than IQ. This stuff really matters. And you're so right. Emotional contagion is powerful. Seth Godin said that emotions spread far faster than any virus ever could. So that emotional energy that we're bringing into those spaces matters. And that's why when I go into schools and I'm doing my consultancy work, my first question is, how are we supporting your team? It has to start with the adults in that space, because we can't ask those adults to co-regulate, to normalise, to navigate, to validate, if they themselves aren't feeling regulated. So we have to make sure our team, our staff, our teachers, our midday supervisors, all of those people are properly supported, because that's where it starts. Everything else hangs from that. Everything. So important.
And what do you see as I think we've covered some of them probably, but what are the biggest barriers to developing good emotional literacy? What do you see as the biggest challenges that children, young people might face? And I think we've kind of covered some of it with the adults around them, but what else
Yeah,
do you
I'd
think?
say that's the biggest barrier, but then also time, if we're looking at it in schools and at homes, that the world is very different to what it used to be. It is so fast paced, both in schools and in homes. And I think that emotional capacity is impacted by the speed of life that we're seeing right now. I also think that there's just this lack of understanding around, we hear the word snowflake parenting and gentle parenting, and it all just gets put into this really unhelpful kind of bracket that I think there's so much misinformation spread. Boundaries are incredibly important for children. No one's questioning this. But the other thing around the understanding is I get people say to me, well, it never did me any harm. I didn't have this and I'm okay. But there's a few things with that. The suicide rates are really high right now for adults. It's not just children in a crisis. And even, way back when, people were taking their own lives. We just didn't speak about it. It was a crime. So we're not all okay. We're not all okay. And the other thing is, we're not living then, we're living now. The world is different. We can't compare. We have to keep looking forwards. And you used a really good word earlier, which was reflective. And we have to be able to reflect. We're all going to have moments where we where we react instead of responding because of what's going on for us. We need to be kind to ourselves around it. We don't need to beat ourselves up. We can reflect and think, do you know what? Why did I react in that moment? What was going on for me? And how can I repair that? And I think that's the time element is hugely significant in terms of those barriers, because we want predictable repair routines in school that are saturated in kindness for both the teacher and the child. And I think the repair work is really such an underutilized tool for emotional literacy. If we're delivering emotional literacy through a 6-week program or through our PSHE curriculum, or even by drip feeding it into curriculum through our history lessons and our English lessons, PE, you can drip feed it into everything. But if your repair work isn't saturated with that approach, then you're going to undo everything else that you've done anyway, because it's that repetition that wires the neural pathways that supports that emotional development and those emotional literacy skills. So I definitely think time is a huge thing for parents and for teachers, a huge barrier. Another barrier is sensory overwhelm. Sensory overwhelm for the child, sensory overwhelm for the adult. So interestingly, we're entering into September. We have had the HAF programme on over summer at Bridge the Gap, so very busy. So all of the rooms aren't quite looking what they looked like when we broke up in July, because we've had groups of young people navigating the space, having a great old time. And yesterday I walked into the Rainbow Room, one of our therapeutic rooms, and I instantly felt my body react, not in a great way. It felt chaotic. And this is a therapeutic space. So we're talking, compared to a chaotic space elsewhere, it might seem nothing. But instantly I felt overwhelmed in that space. And I spent the next hour just decluttering, organising, neutralising. And instantly my body felt better. Now, in terms of sensory overwhelm, our classrooms are so colourful, they're so bright. And there is so much choice and autonomy for teachers to make around what works for them as well. I understand that. But if we're walking into those spaces, those environments that have the power to co-regulate with us, and we're not enhancing that resource in the very best way, then that can become a barrier to any kind of learning, not just emotional learning, but any learning. The children love bright colours. They walk into a space, they've been told that this is for them. You know, look at these bright colours, this is great, this is what it looks like for you as a child. So they're programmed to want that. But that doesn't mean their body wouldn't feel different in a completely different kind of neutralised, heuristic kind of space. So I think those three things: adult discomfort, time barrier, and sensory overwhelm.
None of which are actually in the child or the young person, which is interesting, isn't it? It's all of the things that we as adults have control to do and to make changes. I mean, I think I bang on all the time about the need for more reflective practice in education. I just don't understand. Well, I do understand why we don't have it. It's time and money. But I believe the impact it would have to allow staff to have that space to explore the incident that happened the other day with X, Y, and Z student on young person, and why it happened and what that might be linked to. We just don't have the space, do we, generally, in teaching? Well, I know I didn't when I was in mainstream teaching. I don't think it's changed hugely now.
No.
But that needs to reflect is crucial. And the environment, we do forget about the environments, particularly at secondary level. You know, I've been doing some research around attendance, and it keeps coming back to the same thing, that for lots of young people, I've worked in alternative provision where young people weren't going into school for 2 or 3 years just because it was just too much. It wasn't even about the lessons. It wasn't even about the learning. They hadn't even got through into the classroom before they just were wearing uncomfortable clothes, surrounded by, you know, my old school was 1,200 pupils. So, you know, and they're bigger than that now, aren't they? The noise, the canteen smells, you know, all of those things are just massive overload, even before we expect them to sit down and try to learn. So there are lots of things that we almost need to lay the foundation, don't we, for that emotional literacy, for it to land. And I guess talking about foundations, thinking about that whole school approach. So I know you work with schools as well. We would hope that schools have an emotional wellbeing strategy or a mental health strategy or something that has emotional wellbeing as part of it. You know, that can feel a little bit overwhelming, I think, for leaders, particularly if that's not their area of expertise. You know, if they're very curriculum focused. What advice would you give to school leaders in embedding a whole school approach to emotional literacy? I know that's a massive question, but what would be your first steps, top 3, however you want to take it?
I'd say 1, ask for help. Think about why you want to make the change, why you're wanting to add this policy. And are you really ready and willing to have reflective and honest conversations around perhaps things that are different to when you first came into education? So I think that's the first one, is am I ready? And ask for help, because you're right. You know, in education, we're not mental health nurses, we're not therapists, we're not educational psychologists. We are amazing at what we do within that space. But I couldn't do what I do without my ed psych, without my mental health nurses, without our therapists. You know, it's so important that we have those conversations. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is we really need to look at not just a wellbeing policy. For me, it never works. We need to look at a whole school policy, and that has to include your behaviour policy.
Mm.
If you are bringing in a wellbeing policy that is contradictory to your behaviour management system, it's never ever going to have the impact you want. And I'm imagining you're bringing this policy in because you really care. You want these children to feel safe in your school. You want them to thrive. You want them to learn and do well. The behaviour policy has to reflect that as well. So again, it's going back to having some difficult conversations, which I have had to have, and the time has to be right for this as well. It's okay if you say, do you know what, this feels like too big a jump. I know not all the team are going to be on board. You know, okay, well, I'll give you some things to reflect upon and let's come back to it. But the other thing is, what are the long-term outcomes you want for your children? Not the short term, when they're here on that day-to-day basis, but what is your long term? And I think have that at the heart of those decisions that you're making in terms of your policy. Don't just make it a tick box or go online or get a wellbeing policy. That'll do. What area are you living in? What challenges are you seeing for these children?
Yeah.
What each cohort can be different of children, as we know, and include your team within that policy as well. A wellbeing policy for the school should focus on wellbeing for adults, wellbeing for children, wellbeing for parents, for how they experience coming into that space as well, but also your behaviour policy. It's so important. And I understand it's not easy. I've been there. But if our long-term outcomes are what we're driving this change with, then that really helps us to make those decisions for the here and now. But you have to have your team supported properly. And as an SLT, you know, if you're leading in a school, what support is for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
Which is
I know
often
as a
missed, isn't
leader,
it?
yeah, it is hard because you're trying to support everybody else and you're never going to get it right every time. You're just not. You are human. You're not a robot. But what support is there for you? For me, all senior leaders in school should receive clinical supervision. They have to navigate so many different challenges. They have to absorb so many different stories from both staff, for families that they're seeing, the children, safeguarding issues. Where is the clinical supervision and support for those people? That will ripple down massively to their team, to the children. So yeah, I don't know if I answered that question fully, Becky,
No,
but
absolutely. But I think it is start with recognizing that the leadership need to be on board. They need to have the time and the space to make it happen and make it work. And they need to bring the team with them. And I would argue, and I'm sure you would as well, bring the children and young people with you as well when you're developing these policies. You know, because we can often think that we know how a school feels, but from a child in a particular context or in a particular year group, it might feel very, very different. So understanding what all those different members of the community are experiencing in your school is absolutely crucial as well. And I think that
asking for
link,
help.
yeah, absolutely. No, I think
Because
that's really important, not just assuming that you have to know all the answers, because you don't.
exactly, you don't, and you've been told you should. I get
Yeah.
it. You have been told from the powers that be, anything that wrong with society that we're seeing, teachers should do it, schools should
Yeah.
do it. So you are told that you should be a mental health nurse, you should be a counsellor, you should be a social worker. You know, you should be all of these things, but you're not. And it's okay. Ask for help. There is so much nuance in this space that when we're creating and cultivating these policies, we want to make sure that we are asking for help from professionals to ensure that we're not using language that could add to harm over time. It is so nuanced. It's specialist. So don't be afraid to ask for help. You know, it's so important. And when you do that, the impact of it is huge. And have patience with it. You know, these shifts take time, don't they?
And
It doesn't
I was
happen
going to say,
overnight.
these things can be long term. You know, you should be planning for these things to not to suddenly. We're coming up to inset days, aren't we? I mean, everyone loves an inset day when a new approach is demanded of everyone in the room, and then you have 2 hours to understand it and then implement it. But actually what we should be doing is looking over a 2, 3, 4 year period of slowly implementing, thinking about what those quick wins are that you can get in place initially, and then start to build those foundations. But that regular drip feeding of the understanding around what you want, rather than this, here's the policy, off you go and do it, which is what we see so often, isn't it?
Absolutely. I'm really busy next week with inset days, but interestingly, this week coming, I think we've only got one new setting that we're going to for training. The rest are settings that we're returning to deliver training because of that. It is, you know, okay, you had this a year ago. You've had a year to try and put this into practice. What have been the challenges? What have been the barriers? Okay, let's extend this now. Let's go a little deeper. Let's create something and work together to really help get those long-term impacts. It's an investment, isn't it, in the community? You know, the whole community, because those children are going to go on to leave. But those language shifts matter. You know, cultures change when you make small, simple language shifts that happen consistently. What we think about a child, what we say about a child quickly becomes what we think about them. So capturing that language, and I got laughed at by my son yesterday saying, "Oh, Mum, you're so woke."
I get
Because he
time.
was playing GTA, and I said, "Oh, I just don't like it. I don't like this violence." He says, "Mum, it's a video." I was like, and I went it off on. He went, "Mum, you're being really woke. Like, I'm just having a little play on this video game." But I'm not. I hate that word. But what I am, it comes back to that reflection, isn't it? But every person I come across who might behave in a certain way that upsets me, is harmful to me, I still feel like I can understand why, or try and understand why. Not because they necessarily are going to be in my life, but because that is helpful for me. I like to assume that everybody's doing their best, because that makes life better for me. And we've all got different pressures, we've all got different viewpoints, and that's really hard. But yeah, for me, it's the language. I don't want to just say these things randomly about people, because that becomes what you think about life and people and humans. And I would much rather challenge what is said verbally, because it really does impact what you think and then feel about people and situations.
In terms of emotional literacy, we hear children, and the way they speak about themselves and the way they see themselves impacts the way they feel and often the way they behave. They can see themselves as the naughty boy or what have you, and then it becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that language, the way they talk about themselves, will impact how they're feeling. We know that's the case. We've got to model that as well, haven't we?
Yeah. Language is important. Sorry, I'm going to give one more tip, Becky.
Yeah, please.
Because language is so important. And one tip I want to give to all school staff is stop questioning children. Use curious language. That's interesting. I wonder, oh, that's interesting you feel that way. I wonder why that might be. And it's a question, but it's an open-ended question, and they don't have to answer it. But you are responding to those moments in a way that is planting seeds. Another really good one is and instead of but. So just switching out. A child's very angry and they are behaving in a way that is really challenging for us adults. There are two ways that we can approach that. We can say, and we can think with our emotional literacy hats on, and we can say, I can see you're angry and it's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to hit, versus you're angry, I can see that, and I'm not going to let you hurt yourself. I'm not going to let you hurt others. That says, I'm not accusing you. I'm recognizing I'm the adult. You look really scared and overwhelmed, and it's okay because I'm not going to let you. I'm not going to let you do these things that afterwards I know you're going to feel really horrendous about. I understand that right now you are terrified and you don't know how to articulate that. You're not saying all of this, but by switching that word out, that's what you're saying. So
the but almost suggests you don't, that what you've just said isn't the case. Like,
I
can see your anger, I care about that, but no one hears a bit before the but, do they?
No, they don't. So and is such a powerful link word, and you can utilise that in so many different ways when you're in keeping boundaries. So I'll say to parents, their child might not want to come off the Xbox, and their aim is perhaps for them to come off the Xbox or the iPad without being dysregulated. As they switch that up because they might be dysregulated because they really want to be on that, you're still going to instill the boundary. And you can validate their you're really upset because you do want to come off the iPad, and it's time for us to go outside now. It's instilling that boundary, but that emotionally intelligent link word just changes the whole delivery and how it's received as well. And you can use that for adults as well. Really important.
I'm going to be using that for some adults I can think of. It's very helpful.
Yeah. So curious language.
Yeah. And it tells you, I care, I recognise your challenge, and I care enough to put the boundaries in place.
Yeah.
And
I acknowledge myself as the adult in this situation.
Yeah. Brilliant. Really powerful. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Well, listen, it's been fabulous talking to you. We always come at the end of our episodes to our sharing is caring, and we ask our guests to recommend something. So have you got something you think we should be reading, listening to, engaging with? Excited to hear.
I have. I've got my book it's not my book, it's David Whittaker's book.
Yes, David Whittaker. Yeah.
The Kindness Principle. I would love every teacher, every school leader to read this book. I think so often in these spaces, teachers can feel like the people like me going into those spaces to talk about these things, like we don't get it. We don't understand how hard it is. I do, but Dave has literally been there and done it all.
And he's running schools on that kindness principle, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. And he's just incredible. So The Kindness Principle is a really great book. And I think you could create some really, in terms of your policies, in terms of your in-house training, this would be a really good go-to book. So that is, I thought long and hard. I thought I've got one thing to share. Dave Whittaker.
Great recommendation. Yes, I've heard him on a few different podcasts, and he really, he's a really good example of someone who can say, I have actually done this.
Yes.
On a whole
and
school
seen
level.
The impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. It's been fascinating talking to you today, and I've loved hearing all about Bridge the Gap, and can't wait to see how your journey continues. You're doing amazing work. So thank you all for listening, and don't forget to drop us an email if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, or want to share some brilliant work that you're doing for wellbeing in your setting. Let us know about your emotional literacy strategies, what you're up to and what's working really well. Just drop us an email at teamwellbeing@twinkl.co.uk. Thank you so much, and see you soon.